Alright, well, this is the video for The Tempest. I'm Dr. Norton, and I'm going to be looking over your heads here at my notes as we go through, but I'm excited to get into The Tempest here a little bit. Obviously, this is a play by a man named William Shakespeare, and in some ways, people will say this, that we don't know anything about Shakespeare, and did Shakespeare really write these plays, and why don't we know more about him? It's kind of weird, isn't it? And so forth and so on. People get into this argument. I don't love to get into the debate about who wrote the Shakespeare plays, to be honest with you. That's kind of a fringe argument. It's not real serious in terms of Shakespeare scholarship. And so I don't like to waste a whole lot of time there, but I do want to hit a couple of these things. So you might say that we know very little about the life of William Shakespeare. People have said that, and that's true in some ways. We don't have private letters or diaries. We don't have drafts or revisions of the plays. We don't have critical commentaries or essays in which he describes his philosophy of life or his philosophy of writing of the plays. We don't have that kind of commentary. We don't have his dramatic instructions that would have guided his players and the people that would perform in his plays. We don't have that. And in truth, many of those documents may not have ever been written. He may not have written those things, and that's why we don't have them. They may have been lost or destroyed, but it is equally as like that they never existed. What do we know? Good question. Thanks for asking. We know that Shakespeare died on March 25th, 1616. Actually, the dates of his life, 1564 to 1616. That's going to be important for you to know for the quiz. Take note. So we have this as part of his last will and testimony. So we have that. It's a public record. We have several legal contracts and court documents that involved Shakespeare as principal or witness. We have parish records, church records, that show that he was a regular church attender. It's thought that church attendance was actually not voluntary, not optional, actually. So anyway, we have documents that he went to church in a city called Stratford-upon-Avon. We have official public records that list Shakespeare's involvement in King James's royal court. Now, during Shakespeare's life, you have Queen Elizabeth in his younger years, and then King James in his older years. That was kind of the crossover between the two rulers there, Queen Elizabeth and then to King James. So we have records that he was involved in King James's royal court, most likely there to put on entertainment and to do plays for the monarchy. This is very common for the monarchy to want to have some great playwrights or good drama come and performed in the king's court. Shakespeare's name obviously appears on the title pages of his own works, but his name also appears in the written and recorded works of some of his fellow playwrights. So, for instance, other playwriters of his day made reference to Shakespeare. Guys like Robert Greene, Henry Chettle, John Davies, Francis Mears, Ben Jonson, and many others. In truth, we have more public records of Shakespeare's life than will exist of my life in 400 years. And that makes sense, right? I mean, 400 years from now, people will have very little to say or know about me, Dr. John Norton from Concordia University. There's far more documentation on Shakespeare. I like what Ralph Waldo Emerson says. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a famous American writer in the early part of America's history, he's famous for writing the following statement about Shakespeare. He says, "Shakespeare is the only biographer of Shakespeare. He is the one person in all modern history fully known to us." Strange. Why would Emerson say that Shakespeare is the only person in all modern history fully known to us? Well, how about this? If you asked me what President Obama thought about love and devotion, I really couldn't tell you much. If you asked me what Shakespeare thought about love and devotion, man, I could point you to hundreds of pages of plays and poems. I could point you to many, many characters and different conflicts and situations. I would point you to, for instance, to Romeo and Juliet, perhaps, a play you might be familiar with, where we see two people connect in a very deep and significant way, so much so they're willing to sacrifice everything for each other. That says a lot about Shakespeare's belief about love and devotion. What is true love? What is devotion? I would point to also to King Lear, another awesome play by Shakespeare that hopefully you'll get to read someday, or maybe you already have. But in King Lear, we see that Shakespeare, what he believes about devotion through this amazing portrayal of a daughter and her love for her father. In that play, just in a quick nutshell, there's a daughter named Cordelia and a father, King Lear. And he goes kind of crazy. He goes kind of manic and just banishes his daughter for no real reason. I mean, if you read the play, you'll see there's a reason, but it's not a good reason. And the guy's an idiot. And he recognizes it later that he's a great fool. But he kicks his daughter out. But even after he kicks her out, she comes back. And she eventually saves his life and gives her life for him. An incredible story of love and devotion. It says a lot about what Shakespeare felt about love and devotion. Again, more than I know about Obama, President Obama's feeling about love and devotion, for instance. If you asked me what Oprah Winfrey thought about the nature of authority structures and good government, I really couldn't tell you. I think she's a Democrat, but I don't know. I know she likes Obama. She's a Democrat, right? I can tell you that much, right? And maybe she has some kind of feelings that she connects with the Democratic Party and so forth. But with Shakespeare, you talk about authority. Now, we're going to be reading The Tempest this week, and so, or maybe you just have. I don't know when you're watching this video, but I would point you to The Tempest about this issue of authority, where we find a man named Prospero who sacrificed his own position as a duke in Milan to pursue dark arts. Now, dark arts is like magic and deep type of science. I think what we're supposed to see here is a guy who went kind of crazy with the power that comes from authority. Power is an amazing thing. Power is a wonderful thing in some ways, but it also has a distorting influence on people's lives. And we see this in popular culture today. I think of a guy like Dennis Rodman, who was an amazing basketball player, but really has made some interesting decisions with all that fame, and his life has gone in a direction that has been harmful to himself in some ways. Many other actors and actresses who get in that place of stardom and power, and it's too much for them to handle, and they kind of go crazy in a way. In some ways, that's what happens to Prospero. He gets so involved in this dark arts and so involved in the power of what it is to really have control and authority that he loses his mind in a way. And this same man, actually, after he loses his dukedom, he's taken captive and then sent out to sea, as you'll see, or as you've seen. He's given a second chance to govern on an island. He struggles with the responsibility and learns much about personal sacrifice and what is truly required of a leader. I could go on in this way. We have 37 plays. That's an important number to know. We have 37 plays. We have 150 sonnets. Another good number to know. And we have 2 long narrative poems. Shakespeare's works give us an intimate look into his own mind, into his own feelings and desires, into his view of the world around him. Please don't be mistaken now. Shakespeare's works are complicated. They're not, you don't just say, oh, I see what kind of mind Shakespeare had by just a first glance. No, it takes a little more than that. They're complicated, they're complex, and full of what seem contradictions at times. To arrive, I think, at a clear understanding of the plays takes some time and some energy. But answer me this. What person do you know that is not complex, that does not struggle with complexities or struggle with contradictions? What person have you ever met that is that simple, that on first meeting, I got him figured out? There's no one like that. And so with Shakespeare, it's the same way, really. What we know about Shakespeare most of all, he was as fine a thinker as any that has walked the earth. So how about some biographical details? Some things that are important and interesting to kind of know in our study of Shakespeare. The name Shakespeare is found on public record in the English Midlands. This is kind of the middle area of Shakespeare, where Stratford-upon, or the middle area of England, in this area called Stratford-upon-Avon is a city, and that middle area of England is called the Midlands, right? So there, the name Shakespeare is on record in the Midlands of England as far back as the 12th century. From these records, we can make a strong case for the fact that Shakespeare's grandfather, a man named Richard Shakespeare, moved to the area sometime before 1529. Shakespeare's father, a man named John, was a wool dealer, a glove maker. According to public records, he loaned some money on interest. And then he served in several local governmental posts. John Shakespeare married Robert Arden's youngest daughter. Again, another public record, and that happened in 1557. His wife's name was Mary, and so that's Shakespeare's parents, John and Mary. The couple had 4 sons. William was the oldest son, and they had 4 daughters. Now, William Shakespeare was baptized. We have public record of this in Holy Trinity Church. I mentioned that, which is part of the Church of England. He married. What did I say? He was baptized. Yes, I said that. He was baptized in Holy Trinity Church. Yes, and then he married. Obviously, many years later, at age 18, he married Anne Hathaway in 1582. He was 18 and she was 26. And interesting. Their first child was born 5 months later. Hello. Now, that's a controversial thing, and definitely looked down upon in Elizabethan and Jacobean society, but it was not uncommon, from at least what my research has told me, not uncommon that women would be married, women would be pregnant when they were married. So Anne Hathaway, his wife, Shakespeare, William, and Anne Hathaway had 3 kids. Susanna was their eldest, that's their daughter, and they had twins, Hamnet, a little boy, and Judith, a little girl. Now, after the birth of the twins, Hamnet and Judith, there's a time we call the lost years, a 7-year period. We don't have much or any record of what Shakespeare was doing, or he's gone. There's all kinds of really cool and kind of funny books, some cool, some funny, some interesting, some plausible, some not, about what Shakespeare was doing during these 7 years. But the documentation picks back up in 1592 with a man named Robert Greene, who was a rival playwright and poet during Shakespeare's time. Kind of I don't know what the history books tell us about him, is that he's a bit of a shady character. Like drinking, like partying, like just the wildlife. People equate him, actually I believe it's Stephen Greenblatt, I have it a text up here. Stephen Greenblatt connects Robert Greene with Shakespeare's, one of his most famous kind of comedic drunkards, a guy named Falstaff. And so Robert Greene was supposedly this kind of character. But anyway, Robert Greene didn't like Shakespeare much, according to at least what he wrote. He thought Shakespeare was stealing ideas from a lot of the other playwrights in the area. So anyway, he called Shakespeare an upstart crow, and then he said, basically, he's using our plays and making them better. So definitely some jealousy in that statement, I think. So then Shakespeare is listed on many popular plays from this date until his death. From 1592 until his death, he's listed out on many popular plays. In 1595, he was named one of the senior members of a well-known acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. 1596, he applied for a coat of arms. This is kind of a thing they did back then. You could apply for a coat of arms. Actually, Shakespeare's father started the paperwork many years earlier, 20 years earlier, and then Shakespeare picked it back up, or William did. And by applying for a coat of arms, he could earn the title or buy the title, purchase the title of gentleman. And that's kind of reviewed and then handed out by the royal court, or by Queen Elizabeth at the time. Would have been, it would have been Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, so this would have been still in 1596. 1598, he received the honor from the Queen of being a gentleman. And then with that, he was able to do quite a few more things in society. He became part owner in the Globe Theatre and bought some properties and so forth. These were honors that were allowed him because he was a gentleman. So after this time again, he was involved in London theatre as well as holding some positions back in Stratford. He never gave up on his life in Stratford. That was definitely still part of his life all through. In 1612, though, we see Shakespeare write in some public document that Stratford was his full-time place of residence. And so we assume in 1612, maybe he gave up his theatrical career, or at least his full-time career in theater, and went back to Stratford, perhaps to retire, or perhaps to start a different season of his life. We have some public transactions from 1612 to 1616, and then the final public testimony, his final will and testimony, on April 23rd, 1616. All right, so let's get into this book, this play. Act 1 starts with a massive storm. Let's take a look at it. This play starts kind of cool here. The master, "Bosun! Here, master, what cheer? Good, speak to the mariners, fall to it yearly, or we run ourselves aground. Bestir, bestir. He's frantic, right? Enter the mariners. Ah, hey, my hearts. Cheerily, cheerily, my hearts. Yare, yare. Take in the topsail, tend to the master's whistle. Blow till I burst thy wind, if room enough. Enter all these guys, right? Alonso says, good bosun, have care. The bosun was one of the key leaders on the boat, one of the key sailors. Good bosun, have care. Where's the master? Play the men. The bosun, I pray now, keep below. Get out of here, he's saying. We have enough trouble on our hands as it is, you fool. Get down below decks. You don't belong up here. Antonio says, where's the master? Do you not hear? You mar our labor. Keep your cabins. Do assist the storm. That's a great beginning. So the place is going crazy. This starts really, we call this in medias res, right? In the middle of the action. There's a storm at the sea, on the sea, and these guys are in it. They're on board this boat. Alonso is the king, and so he's really in charge. He's the head of everything, but not in a storm. Who's in charge on a ship? The captain is in charge on a ship. And who's not? If the captain's not there, it's whoever's next in charge. And right here, it's the bosun, the boatswain, as it's printed there. And he's telling the king, get underneath, get off my deck, basically. Now, that's significant for a lot of reasons. When is it okay to tell a king what to do? Never, actually. That is what we call a subversion of authority. You flip it on its head. That's never okay. But here, in a storm, in a violent moment, in a place where everything is topsy-turvy, everything is turned upside down, if you will, even the authority structures are flipped upside down. And so that's an important thing to think about as we start this play. We have a guy like the bosun telling King Alonso, get underneath, get out of here because you're making things worse. You assist the storm. You're killing me, King Alonso. You're killing me. A storm in literature, a storm in Shakespeare's plays, a storm anytime in art is usually a symbol for something else. I think it's a good idea when you see a storm in literature to look for storms other places. You see literal storms, but look for figurative or literary or emotional or psychological storms as well. The storm is a literal storm like this is usually accompanied by another kind of storm as well. So keep your eyes out for that. What other storms do we see? I wrote here some storms in a relationship difficulties, storms in government, upheaval, chaos, or mutiny perhaps. Next kind of key scene here is Act 1, Scene 1, line 63. Gonzalo, I think this is hilarious, but he says, Gonzalo on line 63, now would I give 1,000 furlongs of sea for an acre of barren ground. We can picture him probably puking from seasickness here too. I don't know. He's just like probably sick to his stomach. Oh my gosh. I just want to be on the ground, man. Long heath, brown furs, anything. Talking about the ground, right? The wills above be done, but I would fain die a dry death. I'd rather, even if I have to die, just let me die on hard ground. I think this is important because this really points to the realism of Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare uses all kinds of magic in the text. Magic is a theme, and there's all kinds of imaginary things and fairies and sprites and so forth that go on, fantastical elements. But there's also a key element of realism in Shakespeare. Now, what I mean by realism is things that are plausible elements, realistic elements, things that are true to life. Now, I wrote a moment here, I said, a good question to ask yourself through your reading this semester, is it plausible? Now, anything you read, whether it be Shakespeare or anything, is it plausible? Is this realistic? If it is not, why not? That's a good question to ask. Is the author trying to make me think about reality in a different way? Is there a reason for this action that I'm not seeing or failing to recognize? All right, so anyway, so Gonzalo, his statement here, why do I call this realism? Because that's the kind of thing you say. I don't know if you've ever been on a storm. If you've ever been out to sea in a storm, that sucks. It is horrifying. I haven't even been in a storm. I've just been in like big waves on a boat, and it's a disaster. You feel awful. And so his very realistic sentiment speaks again to the very realistic sentiments that Shakespeare will bring into this play. Even among all the kind of fantastical elements, there's a realism to the emotional outcry of certain characters in certain different situations. And so this is an important thing to recognize. So let's look at Act 2 then. So it's right below here. The beginning of Act 2. Some important things that Miranda questions her father. Right? She says this: "If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. The sky, it seems, would pour down stinking pitch. But that the sea, mounting to the welkin's cheek, dashes the fire out. Oh, I've suffered with those that I saw suffer. A brave vessel, who had no doubt some noble creature in her, dashed all to pieces. Oh, the cry did knock against my very heart. Poor souls, they perished. Had I been any god of power, I would have sunk the sea within the earth, or ere it should the good ship so have swallowed, and the frauding souls within her." Now pause there for a moment. We learned quite a bit about Miranda here. First, right? Miranda, tender heart. I kind of chuckle at some of these things that she says. Oh, I have suffered, right? That she's very empathetic. She's a very compassionate person. She just seems very kind. That's her first words, right? That she puts empathy out to these. She sees these guys suffering at sea. She doesn't know who they are, but she feels deeply for them. Oh, if I was a god, I would empty the sea to save these men. It's very passionate and dramatic. Second thing we see here about this in this scene is that her first statement: "If by your art, Dad, if you've done something here, did you cause the storm?" Now I find this funny in some ways because, I've been in different lightning and thunderstorms. I have 3 children. When I've been in storms, at no point do my kids look up at me and say, "Dad, did you do this? Did you cause this storm?" That doesn't happen, right? And so, what are we supposed to think here? Well, obviously, this is not the first time, right? This is not the first time that perhaps Miranda has seen her dad do some magic. And pretty serious magic, obviously. Prospero, right from the get-go, we see has some pretty crazy power. That he can actually create a tempest at sea that would cause a ship to be broken to pieces on the ground. And at the same time, as he says here, "Be collected, no more amazement. Tell your piteous heart, there's no harm done." How can he assure her with so much confidence? Because he's in control. He's in control of the storm. He's in control of the ship. He's in control of these guys and their bodies. He can save them. Powerful, right? Miranda, "Oh, woe the day." And then Prospero again, "No harm." Calm down, basically, right? "I have done nothing, but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art, not knowing of whence I am, nor that I am more better than Prospero, master of a full poor sail, and thy no greater father." Now basically what he's saying is, there's a lot you don't know. Sweetheart, you just picture his fatherly tone. "Sweetheart, there's a lot that I haven't told you. Come on, sit down. Let me give you the lowdown here." And this is kind of what he does, right? She even says, "More to know. Did never meddle with my thoughts." And he says, "'Tis time I should inform thee further. Lend thy hand, give me your hand, and pluck my magic garment from me." Well, I think that's hilarious as well, right? So he's got this, who knows what that thing looks like. This is a crazy magical robe he's wearing. He's like, "Rah, rah, rah, the sea, storm, break the boat, save the men, bring them ashore. Don't worry about it. Miranda, I got this. It's cool. Sit down. Let me tell you what's gone on in your life. Let me tell you the story of your life, basically." All right, so what do we learn about Prospero here? The dude has some power. He is in control. Then he tells Miranda the story of how he lost his dukedom. Right? He was Duke of Milan. It's interesting, I think, in this passage here at the end of it. Right? So you're going to read here, or you've read here. It's interesting, I think, at the end of the story where he says these lines. Line 88, I believe it's right here. "I pray thee mark me," he says to her. "I thus, neglecting worldly ends, all dedicated to closeness and the bettering of my mind with that which, but by being so retired, I withdrew into my chamber to do this magic," right? "I so retired, overprized all popular rate." He pulled aside. He didn't govern anymore. He gave up his authoritative position. He gave up his role as authority figure in Milan to do what? To do these dark arts. He really takes it on himself here. And then he says, in my false brother awakened an evil nature. He says that he awakened in his false brother an evil nature. He says that because he was pulling away to do dark arts, right? He let his brother kind of take his place. He kind of substituted his brother. Said, hey, Sebastian, come here, man. Will you take care of this stuff? Will you rule while I'm gonna go down there and do some crazy magic? It's really fun, dude. But you be in charge while I do that, okay? You'll be my substitute teacher, my substitute duke. Well, Prospero realizes now, and he says, it was my fault. By neglecting my duties, by giving my brother power and authority that he hadn't earned, nor had he been given this himself, I put him in a role that he couldn't handle, and it's my fault. I think that's fascinating that Prospero takes blame. This is the very beginning of the play, right? So it's kind of fascinating to see this in Prospero. I awakened in him an evil nature, and my trust, like a good parent, did beget of him a falsehood in its contrary, as great as my trust was, which had indeed no limit, as confidence stands bound. I blew it. I gave him too much. It was my burden to bear. It was my authority to bear. It was my rule. And yet I gave it to someone else. And when you do that, it seems the comment here is, when you don't take responsibility for the authority you've been given, chaos can ensue. People can break down, and bad things can happen. That's what we see about the message here. And that's something very important, I think, about Shakespeare's comments about what is authority, what is the nature of governance or government and authority. Again, this play and this era, this time period, right? We have it's the Elizabethan era, the Jacobean era. So Elizabeth is ruling from 1558 to 1603, and then James takes over in 1603. But this is a time when people really believed in the divine right of kings, that to be a king or to be in authority, this was something that God gave you, that God put you in this role. What is Shakespeare doing with this idea of authority? It's a good question to be asking. So, I gave him more than he can handle. That's a key theme in the play, authority. What other authority figures emerge in the play? That's a good thing to look for. What other authority figures emerge in this play? How do they act? How do they use or misuse their power? And we're going to see that, right, in the next act. Yeah. If you look at lines 154. 154. Yeah. Prospero says, "Oh, a cherubim, thou wast that did preserve me. Thou didst smile, infused with a fortitude from heaven. When I have decked the sea with drops full salt, under my burden groaned, which raised me an undergoing stomach to bear up against what should ensue." She asks him, I must have been a burden to you when we were on that ship, when they set us out at sea, right? So Alonso and Sebastian, they abduct Prospero and his daughter. Prospero's wife has died, we assume from earlier in the text. They kidnap the two and put them on a boat and set them out to sea, to drift and then just to die at sea is the hope. There's no sail on the boat, there's nothing. It's just drift out at sea and die, starve to death, right? And she says, I must have been a burden to you at that time when we were drifting out at sea. And he says, no, you were an angel to me. You helped preserve me. It says here that he wept drops full of salt upon the boat. I think at this point we see real repentance in him. Right? He's telling the story about his brokenness, his humiliation in some ways. And through that repentance, it says, was raised up in him an undergoing stomach to bear up against what should ensue. Through the process of repentance, through the process of recognizing his humiliation and shame, he gains strength. That's an important process that Prospero goes through. And then Miranda asks, how came we ashore? And he says these words, by providence divine. Now that's going to be an important thing to examine in this text. The nature of providence. What is providential design? What is, when we talk about providence, we're talking about God, we're talking about God. God's authority, God's sovereignty, God as king having sovereign authority and control and his involvement in the affairs of mankind. Some food we have and some fresh water that a noble Neapolitan, Gonzalo, out of his charity, who being then appointed master of this design did give us, with rich garments, linens, stuffs, and necessaries, which since have steaded much. So of his gentleness, knowing I loved my books, he furnished me from mine own library, with volumes that I prize above my dukedom. And so they had some help from a guy named Gonzalo. He put aboard some of his books and a few things that they needed. But in truth, it was providence divine that Prospero gives credit to saving them. Miranda says, Heaven thank you for it, and now I pray, sir, for still 'tis beating in my mind your reason for raising this sea storm. She comes back to the original question. Now, why did you cause this storm in the first place? Why? Prospero, know thus, far forth, by accident most strange, bountiful fortune, now, my dear lady, hath mine enemies brought to this shore. Bountiful fortune, again, that's another reference to providence, right? In other words, God has brought them to the shore. Now, Prospero created the storm, but it was God who brought these men to the shore. And who are the men? The very men that abducted Prospero, Alonso, Sebastian, and others in that court from Milan. And so we have, again, another comment about providence. And so I just wrote here some notes here. So here we have sorry, bear with me here. Another important element of the play, the conflict between providential design, which would say there is a God and he has a plan, that God is involved in human affairs. This is the idea of providential design. A conflict between providential design and nihilism is at work in this play. In nihilism, you may know this term, but it's that all values are unfounded. The belief that all values are unfounded. Nothing can be known or communicated truly. And so nihilism as a belief system, that's not really a belief system, but nihilism as a way of seeing the world is frequently identified with the decline of providentialism, or providentialist thinking, in the Jacobean era. All right? So this play is written during King James's reign. And during that time, it is thought that the decline of providentialist thinking, a decline in the thinking, or decline in the belief that God is in control, that God is involved in human affairs. All right, so here we have Prospero bringing up this idea of providence and providential design as part of one of the themes or conflicts in this play. Is there providential design, or is the world full of chaos and nihilism? That's a question you want to be looking for and asking as you read this play. So in the Jacobean period, early modern England, this was a time of intense public debate, religious and philosophical debates about the meaning of life, about God and the design of the universe, about man's role in the universe. Prospero's claims about providence are part of a much larger debate raging in England when Shakespeare wrote these lines. Take a little break, and we'll pick up again.